Hello and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is a Ukraine War Update news segment for the 11th of March 2023. Let's go to our usual starting point, which is the Ukrainian released figures for the Russian losses for the day before, all the usual caveats. Inaccurate propaganda. Russia don't produce the same sorts of figures. I find these indicatively useful, and I think they are more accurate than many critics give them credit for being, particularly over the last few months, where there's been just huge attention in open source intelligence communities to such figures. Anyway, 1,010 liquidated personnel is a huge number for yesterday for the Russians. So big things have been happening. Obviously, activity in Bakhmut. We've seen a lot of activity in the Avdiivka area, Vuhledar as well, Mariinka. Not too much going on up north from Kupiansk down to Kremna, to be honest. Things seem to have got a bit stuck there. I'll show you some pictures of mud in a little bit, so physically getting stuck as well. 10 tanks, 20 APCs, so that's a pretty significant number. 8 artillery systems, 2 MLRS, 1 anti-aircraft system, 1 drone, 7 vehicles and fuel tanks, and 2 pieces of special equipment. So I think that's a fairly significant day. A bad day for the Russians, of course, could be the same for the Ukrainians too. This is an attritional war. We're in a very attritional phase of the war. The Russians are supposedly on an offensive, so you would expect them to lose more than the Ukrainians. The calculations apparently are that in Bakhmut, although the ratios may be closing as Ukraine are putting up stiff resistance there, but the Russians are gaining ground. Let's go to look to see if we can put some evidence on some of these claims. No aircraft lost yesterday, as per the general staff, but there have been in Vladivostok in Russia, unknown partisans, and this has been going very viral, near Vladivostok, have burned a Su-27 at the Centralnaya Uglovaya airbase in the city of Artyom, where the 22nd Aviation Regiment of the Russian Aerospace Forces is based. From the media, the Freedom of Russia Legion. So this is, oh goodness me, I wouldn't stand that close to a jet fighter that you've just set on fire. That's pretty risky business, but very interesting that partisans are working inside Russia to do something quite as damaging as this. That's significant in my opinion. Here we have the Russian Zala Lancet kamikaze drone still causing a headache for the Ukrainians. Here it's taking out a British supplied Stormer, which is an anti-aircraft vehicle. In fact, it's kind of designed to take out these drones, and yet you've got a reconnaissance drone above it and a Lancet drone taking it out as well. I don't think the damage is too significant here. Sometimes the Lancet drones are not so much ineffective, but you can see, I think the smoke kind of clears quickly. The explosion is the Lancet itself. I don't know how much damage that has done, but significant that it's taking out, possibly rendering inoperable an anti-aircraft piece of equipment. Also interesting that the looks like crew members are getting out there, so it appears that they know it's coming, but they maybe don't have time to hit it. I don't know, or maybe they're just getting out. They seem to be pretty close there. Anyway, that's footage of that. There has been, I'm just going to show you another bit. So on the other side, we have the Ukrainians hitting a Buk medium-range anti-aircraft missile system, and this one definitely goes up. Some pretty significant explosions going on there. So that Buk, I would claim is rendered inoperable from that. It's a significant explosion. So, people, both sides hitting each other's equipment, obviously, but I think it's significant when it's anti-aircraft equipment. 10 explosions were recorded in Melitopol, locals report. So no visual evidence of that yet. This is fairly recent. I mean, this has just come in to me an hour ago. On the flip side, well, actually, not just that. So Melitopol, as well as Berdyansk, apparently, and Mariupol. So those places along the southern coast are being hit by the Ukrainian rockets, whether it be HIMARS or Vilka M, which have a slightly longer range that you would expect Mariupol to be hit with, because I think it's just outside of HIMARS range, really. Russian airstrikes are hitting the city of Konstantinivka. So Konstantinivka is to the west of Bakhmut. You've got Bakhmut here encircled. Konstantinivka is one of these sort of reinforcement hubs for Bakhmut, and it will be one of the main objectives after Bakhmut. You would expect after Chasiv Yar, which sits about there. Konstantinivka has been under an awful lot of pressure recently, and for some time, for some months. It does get hit quite a lot. But I listened to Michael Kaufman, and a brilliant interview. I might do a separate video just on that interview and what we can learn from it. He's just been to Bakhmut, and he's come back with a load of nuggets about what's going on. He's saying there is an uptick of Russian the Air Force there. I think generally it's been fairly ineffective, as in not what you expect the Russian Air Force to be, but just recently it has been ticking up in that area. And here we can see some airstrikes on that settlement. And that should not be in that section. That should be in later sections. So let's move on to some bits and pieces. Now, again, to refer to that Michael Kaufman interview, there's a lot to be said about Bakhmut. He said they aren't just human waves. That is what has happened to some extent, but there are also other units like the Night Unit that does assaults, different assault groups. These are, it's a varied force, Wagner, and again, you've got your artillery support and whatnot. They are at times really, really effective. Certain groups have loads of equipment, that kind of stuff, but don't just think that Wagner is just waves of human conscripts attacking without very good training or equipment. So anyway, according to Serhiy Cherevati, spokesman for the Eastern Grouping of Ukraine's armed forces, cited by CNN, a third wave of Wagner troops fighting in the Bakhmut area is being replaced by the regular army due to Prigozhin's conflict with Russia's military leadership. This ongoing spat between Prigozhin and the MOD is really having an effect, it seems, on operations in the area. But on the other side of the coin, Wagner boss says his group is opening multiple recruitment centers in Russia. Russian state-backed mercenary Wagner group fighting in Ukraine's east has opened new recruitment centers in 42 Russian cities, said the group's founder Yevgeny Prigozhin. So on the one hand, they're being phased out, arguably, in certain areas of the Bakhmut sector. But on the other hand, he's happily recruiting people all around Russia. So I don't know. We'll see how that all turns out. Russia on fire. Here we've got a huge fire at a plastics factory in the Russian Federation. I'm not sure exactly where, but 5,000 square meters has burned, is burning. Roofs collapse, etc., etc. Again, is that as a direct consequence of the war, or an indirect consequence of the war, or completely nothing to do with it? So is it a partisan? Is it an insurance job, or which is an indirect connection to the war because the economy is tanking, or is it just completely random? I don't know. The mud is a problem. Here is an MTLB towing an M777 artillery piece. So this is an APC pulling a howitzer, and it is succeeding, only just. This is the difficulty of the spring muds, and this will prove a challenge for any offensive that is supposed to be taking place at the moment. I mean, the Russian offensive, I don't really know what's going on with the Russian offensive. It seems to have not done an awful lot. I don't know if pro-Russians will try and claim that it's because it wasn't the offensive and they're actually waiting for the Ukrainians to do an offensive, or really that is we have seen it. I'm just not too sure. But anyway, the mud will be a problem going forward. There's still an artillery shortage, or there's lots of claims about this. So Michael Kaufman said that in Bakhmut, it seems like the Russians do have more artillery than the Ukrainians. However, you've got to also remember that apparently, according to Russians themselves, all of their artillery ammunitions are being sent to Bakhmut, and that is to the exclusion of being sent to other places like Vuhledar, so on and so forth. So you've got these other groups saying, in fact, the 136th Motor Rifle Brigade in Vuhledar was saying that we don't have artillery, and they're the ones being sent in to replace the Marines. We don't have artillery down in Vuhledar. We don't have artillery ammunition down in Vuhledar because it's been sent to Bakhmut. So if if the Russians do have an artillery advantage in Bakhmut, as Michael Kaufman is saying, then that doesn't mean that to say that the Russian army has an advantage. It's very different along the front line. In fact, that's another thing Kaufman says is don't generalize about the war looking at any individual place. They're so different. Vuhledar is massively different from Mariinka, which is massively different from Avdiivka, which is massively different from Bakhmut, which is massively different from Kupiansk, Svatova, Kremenet, etc., etc. But anyway, this is from a Russian colonel saying artillery ammunition shortage is still rife in the Russian army. I've repeatedly argued that the Wagner shortage of shells is by no means due to intrigues in the Ministry of Defense. Nobody has shots. Today, there is a real shell hunger at the front, which could end in disaster, but the spring-summer counteroffensive of the armed forces of Ukraine is ahead. What will we fight back? Shovel handles, like in a famous movie? So yeah, things are not great for them. And then we're going to go on to, I keep coming up with that, we're going to go on to military aid, humanitarian aid, and other such things. Let's go on to our first one. So this is an interesting one, this one. Pakistan is not doing this sale to help Ukraine any more than it did with its artillery sales. So this is absolutely correct assessment. I think Pakistan, well, as Trent Telenko says, the Pakistani economy is on the verge of collapse. It needs IMF funds, and the West has a lot of leverage due to Pakistan's crisis level need for Western foreign exchange. So this is a news that Pakistan mass media has reported that it plans to supply 44 T-80 UD tanks in exchange for Western aid that's tanks to Ukraine. Overall, between 1997 and 1999, Pakistan purchased 320 of these tanks from Ukraine. This could be some shrewd, bit of trading here. I imagine that Pakistan are going to get more money for the tanks than they paid for them. Maybe a good investment. Up to $3 million each, selling 44 T-80 UD tanks to Ukraine for Western foreign exchange buys Pakistan's economy more time for its government to make the IMF deal. Needs must when the devil drives pretty much covers it. So interesting, but wow, that'd be super useful. 44 T-80s to Ukraine. That's very, very good indeed. Get as many of them as they can, I would imagine. Looking back to the Russians, we've seen here, we can see a transport train full of, well, with a bunch of different stuff on, your fuel truck, but you see these APCs with the naval turrets on top, a couple of those going past. Theories are abound as to how they're going to be used. Could well be anti-aircraft usage for them behind the lines. I don't know. It's not that they're not going to be particularly any good at anything, but it's quite similar to Hobart's funnies in the Second World War. But it's just that Russia are in a position to have to do that to produce some equipment. Really cannibalizing other things or picking up things they got knocking around warehouses, putting it all together to try and produce something rather than to send out the very best vehicles they could. Well, this is the best vehicles they can, and that's the issue. At least 3 T-90Ms at a train station in Lipetsk in Russia. So I don't know where they've got these from. Could be from any end of the Russian Federation, really. It's a big country, and they picked up 3 more T-90Ms. Meanwhile, they put troops like cattle in in these carriages. So I don't know what that tells you. But anyway, their T-90 is going to be useful for the Russians. But again, only 3 of them. Prime Minister of Finland. So my theory is that Zelensky is the hardest working politician in the world. Like, absolutely staggering. He's just constantly working, constantly trying to get stuff from people. Hats off to him. Really hardworking. Again, I'll signpost you to the very good David Letterman interview on Netflix. My next guest is, I think it's called, with Zelensky. It's about a month old now, but well worth watching still. Just gives you an insight into Zelensky, and he eats and sleeps the war, as you would imagine. But here he's talking to Prime Minister of Finland, Sanna, who arrived in Ukraine yesterday, and they had a meeting. And there was talk after that of Finland maybe considering sending fighter jets. These are Hornets, but these are quite old. The a 18 Hornets. These are 40 years old, so I don't know why you would want to replace an old Soviet fleet with a very old alternative fleet. So I don't know if that's going to go anywhere. I don't know that would be particularly useful, but it could be about getting the cogs moving. But on the same day, he met with Minister of Defence for Norway, Bjorn Arild Gram, and has come away with a couple of extra NASAMS air defence systems, which are incredibly good air defence systems. The announcement came after a visit of Norwegian Defence Minister yesterday, and there you go. Just incredibly hard-working man, Zelensky. Say what you like about him. You know, this in wartime, I don't know what he would be like in peacetime. He only had a 30% approval rating before the war. He wasn't doing particularly well, but he has dealt with the war incredibly well. And I don't think you can argue with that. So Canada has banned the import of Russian steel and aluminium. That's aluminium. Don't get me started on the aluminium argument again. According to the press service of the government of Canada, it's interesting actually. I should have it here, but I don't. Yes, I was reading the EU have said pretty soon. I think it's Joseph Borrell was saying that pretty soon we're going to run out of options for sanctions. We're pretty much there. We've exhausted all the sanctions. So instead, we're going to have to be giving more to Ukraine. So there's a lot more that we can give to Ukraine. There's not a lot more we can take away from Russia, type thing. So that's an interesting claim from the EU. He said, you know, after a year of putting sanctions and increasing sanctions, it's no surprise that there's not a lot further to go. And Flash says, at the same time, the government notes that it has banned the import of all primary Russian steel products, including iron and non-alloy steel, semi-finished products, and finished products such as pipes and tubes. The International Group for Blocking the Assets of Sanctioned Russians, REPO, has frozen assets worth more than $58 billion in 1 year of operation, as according to CNN. So the US and its allies have blocked or seized more than $58 billion worth of assets owned or controlled by sanctioned Russians in the past year, as Western governments continue to dial up the pressure over the Kremlin's invasion of Ukraine, according to a joint statement from a multinational sanctions enforcement task force. I mean, goodness me, there must be a lot of pain, financial pain for a vast number of people within Russia, but there's obviously not a lot they can do about it. During 2022, China supplied Russia with parts for multi-purpose helicopters, again, according to CNN. This is the idea that China really is helping out Russia in ways that it's hard to pin down. In this case, concerning dual-purpose pieces of equipment stuff that can be used for helicopters. So dual purpose means that you've got a part that can be used perfectly innocently for, I don't know, vacuum cleaners, but it can also be used for fixing helicopters or as a part in a helicopter. So you innocently import them as, hey, we're just importing vacuum cleaner parts, and then you're whacking them in helicopters. Whereas if you're importing them for helicopter usage, that would be sanctioned. Russia is apparently sending captured weapons. In fact, this has been reported previously. It's nothing new, but it's come up again. Captured weapons to Iran. In particular, we're talking about the Javelin and Stinger complexes. Iranian engineers are dismantling and examining weapons to use foreign technology to create Iranian replicas. This has always been one of the rationale, one of the reasons why the US in particular has been reticent to give certain pieces of equipment to Ukraine, because in war you will lose stuff, you will have it captured, the other side will find it somehow, and so they didn't want that, and hence they haven't given certain pieces of equipment. But then I think they just got to the point where this is a massive war, we've got to do it, these guys have to win, so that you end up seeing pieces of equipment that they may have originally been pretty reticent to give, now being given. Okay, now on to geopolitics. Actually, just before we go there, I was reading talking about military aid, reading that Serbia have, I talked to you last week or over the last week that Serbia had provided Ukraine with some MLRS missiles or rockets, and other ammunition, I think, and they've been sort of held to account by Russia. Anyway, today they've denied giving that to Ukraine, but they haven't denied. They said they may have got to Ukraine through third parties. So it's kind of like treading that fine line. Anyway, back to geopolitics. This is not to do with Ukraine, but it's to do with just geopolitics and democracy in general. So Xi Jinping has been elected president of China for the third time. Of course, after you change the rules to allow you to be elected for a third time, because before there were term limits, this is what happens. He was unanimously elected head of People's Republic of China and head of the Central Military Commission. Now, what's interesting about this situation is that all 2,952 delegates voted for and 0 voted against. You are not living in anything that looks remotely like a democracy. When 0 people vote against you, there's just no sense of reality where you are going to have unanimous support from everyone. It's just not what happens. But everyone's clapping, and aren't they happy that Xi Jinping is there still, or something? Current situation in North Caucasus, so this is nearby Georgia area. Should events in Ukraine deteriorate more than already for Russia, the protesters topple the current Georgian regime, then the whole region could witness major shifts, says Tendar. Russia has only a skeleton defense in the south. And indeed, here we have the Russian OSINT Defender says the Russian Ministry of Internal Affairs has announced that they are monitoring the ongoing situation in Georgia and that Russian peacekeeping forces in Abkhazia and South Ossetia. So these are 2 areas that are effectively like annexed for Russia. They're pretty good at doing that, Russia, aren't they? As well as forces of the Russian Georgia border have been placed on high alert. I did have, yes, here it is. So I was well, let's talk a little bit more about that. According to the president of the Republic of Abkhazia, military and security forces in the Georgian breakaway region have been placed into a heightened state of readiness while also being deployed towards the border with Russia. Military forces in the Georgian breakaway region in South Ossetia have also been placed on high alert. According to State Border Services, so Jan Narkowicz, who great supporter of the channel, called me out the other day, said, you said that some Russians are fleeing Georgia as a result of the protests, but you didn't give any evidence for that. Where's the evidence? Where are your receipts? Quite right. Here, according to State Border Services, as according to OSINT Defender, over 1,000 vehicles have left Georgia for the breakaway regions or Russian territory within the last 24 hours due to the fear that conflict could soon erupt in the region. And indeed, here we have traffic jams are reported at Upper Lars border crossing from Georgia to Russia yesterday evening. I just looked, still a long line, and actually that's been going on for pretty much 48 hours now. So just that's one of the main border crossings from Georgia there. Long lines of traffic. It appears that Russians are fleeing, or at least some. I don't know how widespread that is. Don't know the numbers you can put on that. At least some Russians are leaving Georgia. Turkey has banned the transit of sanctioned goods to Russia through its own territory, writes Bloomberg. Now, I reported this yesterday. I just wanted to say that, you can go and find that in a Bloomberg article. Turkey blocks transit of goods sanctioned by the EU, US to Russia. Now, what's interesting here is Turkey took this step as the EU and the US put pressure on allies to support measures introduced in connection with Putin's invasion to Ukraine. There are an awful lot of countries around the world that don't really care about the war in Ukraine and Russia, or at least if they do, they care more about making money and doing trade. And so people like the US and the EU have to put pressure on them to make sure that sanctions are upheld if they have committed to sanctions. So Turkey have been a bit kind of like, meh. So the EU and US have said, okay, look, if you don't start upholding these sanctions, we're going to do X and Y. And that brings Turkey into line. So it seems like Turkey has been brought into line from pressure from the US and the EU. The Minister of Culture in Britain, Lucy Fraser, has called to prevent the return of Russian and Belarusian athletes to international competitions, reports The Guardian. This is the pressure that they are trying to put to make sure that Russians can't compete in the Olympics. Whether they will compete in a kind of international under an international flag as opposed to a Russian flag, or whether they'll be banned outright. I don't know. There are lots of people arguing about it at the moment. According to the newspaper, she appealed to the executive directors of the IOC's global partners. So, if you want access to, if you want to change people's opinions, it's just like with Turkey, possibly. You want to talk money here. So she appealed to the executive directors of their global partners, the International Olympic Committee, including Coca-Cola, Intel, Samsung, and Visa, with respect to influencing the decisions of the committee. So there you go, which is inclined to relax the ban on the participation of Russian and Belarusian athletes in competitions. We'll see what comes out with regard to that. That I know a lot of people who have been calling for them to be banned. What level of banning, I don't know. But then the flip side is that the place of the Olympics to get involved in politics? You can see arguments from both sides here. Certainly, having athletes, as we saw in gymnastics last year, supporting the Z on the front of their leotard, that should definitely not happen. But yeah, I'm not sure. I would like to see them banned personally, but I do understand the conflict. It isn't easy. Do athletes represent their country, as in their country's politics, or are they there? But then, if the government is involved in all these projects and in funding of the athletics, and that is, you know, entwined with their budget and their funding of the war effort, and it just gets really messy. And you can see both sides of the argument, but I would incline towards banning them to give pressure for Russia, so that internally they feel like a pariah state, and they get internal kickback from their population. But on the other hand, you could argue that their population will double down against the international community, thinking that they're being unfairly punished, and so it can actually work in the opposite direction. So it's a really difficult situation. I'd be really interested to see what you guys think in the thread below. That's the news for today. Please like, subscribe, and share. I'll get a frontline update to you. It's Saturday, so it will be a bit later today at some point, and I've got a pre-recorded extra. I've got so much content to talk about. I've got a list as long as my arm, and my broken arm, which is, as you can see, I can use it pretty normally if I keep it like that. If I try and do that with it, ouch. So yeah, it's more completely sprained down my arm. Most of you don't care about this, but I fractured my elbow last week. I've got MS. And my feet stopped working, but the rest of my body continued working, and I fell flat on my face like a sack of spuds. Fractured my elbow, but actually I can work a computer, so that's all right. As long as I keep it in this level, I'm good to go. Anyway, that's enough rubbish. Speak to you later. Bye.